Hello everyone, Simon Jacobson here. I apologize for the delay. Another live episode of Meaningful Live. Every Sunday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. This week it's almost an hour later. Update from the spiritual Warfront, Week 8. Divisiveness and War. This program is dedicated by Irina Komisarenko in honor of the troops of Tzahal, the IDF. So nobody likes to talk about war. Nobody likes to update about war, but there is a war. It's close to my heart and close to many of our hearts. I really believe it's not just a matter between Israel and Hamas, or Israel and the Palestinians and the Muslims and the Arabs. It affects us all because that, especially that region in the world, has always been at the center, the heat center, the ground zero. Go back thousands of years. The wars over Jerusalem, the wars in that part of the world between the Christians and then the Muslims, and of course the Jews are always smack in the middle. And just look at the Jerusalem, the old city of Jerusalem. You have the Christian quarter, you have the Arab quarter, you have the Jewish quarter, you have the Armenian quarter. That's another discussion. But it's clearly a vortex, a lightning rod. In the words of the Bible, Jacob put it this way: it's a gate to heaven. And everybody seems to want to be the gatekeeper of this gate to heaven. So if you're a Bible follower, you read the Bible, it talks about the promised land, who it was promised to. It's pretty clear. It's not just pretty clear, it's absolutely clear. So the truth is, if you went with the Bible, it would be, there's no debate here. Now, if you don't want to use God and don't want to speak about any holiness, then frankly, then nobody has any right to anything. There's no Jews, there's no Christian, no Muslims. But if you want to go by God and use it from a religious context, there's a Bible. And that Bible proceeds and is actually the source of both the New Testament and the Quran, and they don't contradict it. So I'm not really sure how that works itself out, even though I do understand that there's a philosophy, ideology behind this. That from a Muslim perspective, at least a big part of Muslim theology is that the Muslims need to rule the world because that's what God wants. He chose them after the Jews had failed and the Christians had failed. You read Sayyid Qutb and some other of the modern Muslim fundamentalism, the fathers of Muslim fundamentalism. This is essentially what they say. And that's why there's a certain sympathy in the Muslim world, even though many will say October 7th crossed the line, went too far. But the general sympathy of understanding that this country called Israel needs to be, God wants it to be, the sovereign control under the Muslims is really quite predominant, more than most people know. So when you're dealing with such a challenge, you're dealing with a religious war. The Western world doesn't like to acknowledge that, but it's very, very obvious that that's the case. I understand the arguments of colonialism and apartheid and genocide and open-air concentration camps. They're all nice Madison Avenue lines. It's very clear what they want to trigger in the Western mind. But this goes much deeper than that, because these battles did not begin in 1948, they didn't begin in 1967, they didn't begin in 1973, and they didn't begin in 2023. You want to go back? Don't go back conveniently to a part of history. Go all the way back. And look, as I said, the battles have raged. I've written a lot about this. I don't want to really go into the theology of it right now. To me, it's more of an update. But there's another thing called in military strategy is this. People cry about the death of civilians. I also cry. Civilians on any side. whether it's on the Jewish side, Muslim side, Christian side, or anyone in this world. Obviously. Anyone that's a decent person, a civil person, is going to cry for the death of any innocent man, woman, and child. Frankly, I even cry for those that are not innocent. A death is a death. And I cry, why did they have to come to a point where there was no choice but to kill them in self-defense? That's also a source for tears. Yes, the Nazis did terrible things to the Jews, but I still cry, not because I have compassion for them, because it's sad that humans could have gone to such a point of savagery and behavior that beyond that was sub-human, sub-animal. However, when people bring upon themselves certain things, they become a threat to others. What do? Why do we put people in prison? Because we want people to be controlled? No, because they're a threat to others. It's as simple as that. So in the laws of war, there's one little common sense. It's called surrender. You want to stop the killing of surrender, unconditional surrender. When Japan did that in World War II, when Germany did that, the war stopped. That's how you end wars. You simply unconditional surrender. And the victor dictates the terms. And you release all the hostages. And you disavow any connection to anything, the calling of destruction of any other people. And you'll have peace. This I have not seen in any media. Nobody writes this. Nobody says, that's how ceasefires are done. Now, this is complicated because there are hostages, innocent hostages, and nobody wants them killed. But they are being used as pawns, and we have to figure out what to do. So, well, the battle continues to rage. Let me share with you on the spiritual side of things. People are still in some shock, even though time has passed. There's a lot of confusion, a lot of uncertainty. What's going to happen? Let's say Israel does its job and eradicates any threat that this can never happen again. A big if, but let's say that happens. But you still have an environment where young children are being taught the virtues of martyrdom, the virtues of trying to destroy a Jew or Israel. That's still in the schools. So Hamas could be a distant memory. So there'll be the birth of some other movement. In other words, the real battle, my friends, is in the minds and hearts of our next generation. Now, I know I'm subjective. I speak as a Jew, as a lover of Israel. I'm not going to deny that. But I really believe I'm sensible enough to be able to understand that we're looking here for sustainable peace for all human beings. I mean, as we are, what do we say, suffering romantics, suffering optimists, like to believe that the world will come to a utopian stage of world peace and the eradication of all war. What will it take to get there? That, to me, is the ultimate spiritual war. It'll take to get there is when people understand that it's not about me. That if you indeed embrace something divine, something transcendent, something sacred, is that life is sacred. Everybody's life is sacred. And no person has a right to infringe on another person's life. You have a grievance, we find ways to air those grievances. I know it sounds simple, it sounds naive, but that's ultimately the goal. And I firmly believe it can happen. Religious wars, even though this is definitely a religious war, but they're not as common as what they once were. They ravaged Europe, and they ravaged the Middle East, and they ravaged Israel for thousands of years. But things changed. It seems like the last vestige is Muslim fundamentalism's need to feel that they need to own or feel that that's what God wants. But that too can be tamed. But you'll need a collective effort, a global effort. I have not seen the leader that calls for that. Everything is more firefighters, band-aids. Let's try this thing, let's try that. Nothing is really comprehensive and long-term. And I say this about Israeli leaders as well. This isn't just let's stop killing. Don't kill us. This is about a vision of the future of the universe. And what is that vision? That each one of us, 8 billion people, we're diverse, different approach to things, different personalities, different faiths and cultures and colors and creeds and language. And yet, we're all part of one cosmic choreography. We're each of us an indispensable musical note in that large composition. If a few of us can embrace that, remember, 8 billion people on this planet are just 8 billion of a few of us. Just each of us multiplied by 8 billion. But we have to think in those terms. When I speak to my Muslim friends, what I say to them is, I don't just say don't kill. Make sure they don't kill people. I say, no, you believe in God? You believe that God wants this world to be decadent free? No corruption? Inspire. Bring light to the world. That's what we do. That's what we, the Jewish people, have been trying to do for thousands of years. Be a living example of what it means to be a kind person, a loving person. You'll have much more impact than violence or through fear or through threats and so on. So the hope is that we'll find a few like-minded individuals, enough to tip the scale. And let those that want to remain toxic and want to remain locked in their stringent position, let them be exposed as such, but not mingle among the rest. Let's define who refuses to accept this concept that all people are created equal, and by the divine creator's he endowed each one of us with that birthright of freedom of expression and freedom of religion. And at the end of the day, we can complement each other. And indeed, if there's something that deserves to be corrected and repaired, let's find a system how to do that. That's the dream. That's the hope. That's the ultimate purpose and the ultimate victory of a spiritual war. That spirituality ultimately dominates. And spirituality, true spirituality, unites, whereas materialism divides. So that's a good segue to what I've been doing these weeks, is taking something from the Bible that we read during this time. And the story indeed continues. And it couldn't be more prescient, it couldn't be more relevant. When you read it, I'm continuously amazed by the parallels. Battles are being fought. So we've talked about the battle between Isaac and Ishmael in the home of Abraham. A man of faith, a man of justice, a man of virtue, who pioneered the path that would lead to all the social justices and civil rights and everything we cherish today, all the values we cherish. It would take thousands of years. So the first battle, Isaac, Ishmael. The next battle, Jacob and Esau, the twin brothers. Another battle between two nations, between individuals that would become two nations. So there you have the parts, the pieces, the characters. You have the ancestor of the Jewish people. I go in that order because that's the first religion. The ancestor of the Christians, Esau, Edom. His grandson would be called Rome. And you have the ancestor of the Arab Muslim world in Ishmael. And the battles go on. Then, finally, Jacob has suffered greatly. He had to escape from his brother filled with wrath, only to go into the fire from the frying pan to meet his uncle Laban, another mischievous, sly, cunning individual. And finally, he builds his family and returns back home to Be'er Sheva, in southern Israel. Vayeshev means to settle. He settled. We're told what happens. Jacob says, enough is enough. I've fought too many battles in my life. I'm worn down. I want to live in peace. I want some tranquility, some harmony. No, but it would not be. The next tragedy takes place. His sons, Jacob's sons, are jealous, envious of their brother Joseph. And they ultimately make a plot first to kill him, and then they sell him into slavery. And that's the story of this week's biblical chapter, into slavery. But who are the slave owners? Yishmaelim. Suddenly Yishmael makes a reappearance. It says Arabs, children of Yishmael. That's who the brothers of Joseph sold their brother to. And they bring him down to Egypt, where he becomes a slave in Egypt, becomes an accountant, then he's imprisoned, and then finally he's released, which we'll read in the next chapter. And he rises to become the viceroy, the second in command in Egypt under Pharaoh, and turns that country into a superpower, because the commodity of the time was not microchips, and was not oil, it was grain. And there was a tremendous famine. And Joseph had an ingenious method of storing that grain, that they would have enough, not just for themselves, but also to trade and sell. So Egypt became the great Egyptian empire. But I'm jumping ahead of myself. Where we are now, we're not up to that yet. He's not become viceroy of Egypt yet. Now he's just a plain slave sold by his brothers out of their jealousy. Now these were not small people. The tribes, the other tribes, Joseph's brothers, were great people. But they were threatened by him. And there are many explanations given what the threat was. The bottom line is jealousy, envy, and divisiveness. Brought what? To the Yishmaelim to make a reappearance. They're buying this Jew Joseph from his Jewish brothers. That's what divisiveness can do. So the end of the story will be a great ending, but it's tremendous pain here. For 22 years, Joseph was gone. His father thought he was dead. So we all have the Joseph within us. We're thrown into a pit. We're faced with adversity. We're faced with Yishmaelim. We're enslaved. Not trying to point fingers and blame anyone, but often it comes from complacency, including the divisiveness I mentioned, and ends up resulting in things that are far, far wandered off far from where you intended in the beginning. That's what happens when mistakes are made. So when you think of the story that's unfolding in the Middle East, in Israel and Gaza, now that the war has resumed with the attempt of trying to eradicate the evil of Hamas, and I think to myself about Joseph. I think how his brothers, it wasn't the Yishmaelim, which were like what would be called today's modern Arab or Muslim, were the ones that initiated anything. It was due to the fact that among the Israelites themselves there was conflict. And conflict weakens you. We're all entitled to disagree. And I'm not suggesting Hamas and the criminals are off the hook. That's not at all where I'm going. I'm just saying there's a picture here. In our own personal lives, the greatest thing you can do is reconnect and reunite with your loved ones. There are people who don't speak to their siblings for all the right reasons, maybe. People with parents and children, spouses. There's plenty of issues that we have. But to be able to transcend that, and I know people will say, well, if you knew what my sister did to me, or my brother or my father, you would also not speak to them. Perhaps. So firstly, that's a rare instance. But even then, we are not meant to be victims. Later we will learn that Joseph was not even angry at his brothers. He said, I was led here by God. He surrendered to a destiny that he did not know where it was coming from. We don't know where our destiny is going. So you have within the story that number one is the battle's not over yet. Jacob, you feel bad for him after everything he went through. He had to have now this with Joseph. He had already to deal with his brother and had to deal with his uncle. But the world is not a perfect world. And when you're a sensitive soul, you're going to feel the brunt of it. And he did. Jacob did. And Joseph was forged through his challenges to become a great man. A great man that when they reunite, he does not humiliate them. He does not seek vengeance. Another lesson in life. He doesn't seek vengeance. He seeks clarity. He seeks destiny. What are we going to do together? But again, we're jumping ahead. Right now, the story is being sold to the Ishmaelites. We must be united, all of us. We must feel that we're all part of one big plan by God. All people on this earth, men, women, children, as I said, of all creeds, colors, religions, and faiths. And that will create tremendous strength, the harmony within diversity that's necessary. In this chapter in the Torah, they have not yet reached that place, but we learn from them. We learn what was going on. Why were they so passionate about their positions they couldn't find some middle ground? But to suggest that you're going to find middle ground when certain atrocities are done and you have a sworn enemy, that's just plain naivete. That's plain delusional. So, my friends, from the spiritual war front, there are many good things, beautiful things happening. Now, from my end, one thing we launched now, I have a book called Torah Meaning for Life. It exists also in Hebrew with an additional chapter about Israel. And so we launched an effort to get that book published, a special edition in honor of the IDF, of the Tzahal, Israeli soldiers, military, and to get it in the hands of every military person we can. So we began a campaign to do that, to bring 50,000 books to it's a book that's inspiring, that is gives strength and courage and clarity. So if you want to participate, just go to our website, meaningfullife.com/operation spiritual sword. Spiritual sword. So that's just one. And then we continue the programming, the videos addressing the topics that many of you ask to us, to ourselves. And the main thing is to remain steady as we go. Stormy seas, but we need to be strong ships. Strong ships that are forging ahead, that are here to bring more light than there is darkness. And a little light dispels darkness. So in the end of the picture of it all, it comes down to that the battle of life is the battle between spirit and matter, or you could say energy and matter. And ultimately spirit will prevail. That I have no doubt about. It's painful every second that it doesn't. We could come to that place, but we have to join together and we have to create that ripple butterfly effect by reaching out, by paying it forward, by influencing people, inspiring them and saying them, now you inspire in turn another 5 people. That's the way to go. And we can and will demonstrate how even a little light dispels darkness, how much more so a lot of light. That's where we are. And we will continue. I, my team, wonderful team, and any one of you I invite and welcome. And I hope you welcome me as well in this joint effort. Because no one is too small and no one is too big. We're all part of the same story, the same narrative. And we have to really mobilize ourselves and connect to each other, collaborate, complement, in ways that we can create something that's more than the sum of the parts. And we will experience true peace, which does not mean the elimination. You only eliminate that which refuses to yield, that the bacteria or the infection that refuses to go away. But you don't in any way compromise any human being. Even those that have embraced an ideology that's completely repulsive to us, Even they are human beings. They need to be taught. Hopefully we can teach them in a peaceful way. Because at the end of the day, that's what God wants, peace. But not peace as in appeasement or peace as in compromising. True peace as wholesomeness, that we can be diverse and yet harmonious in the process. Thank you so much. This has been Simon Jacobson speaking about report from the Spiritual Warfront, Week 8. If you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to write to us. Please subscribe if you haven't yet on our growing YouTube channel, on our other subscriptions. And please check it out, meaningfullife.com. Our website is meaningfullifecenter.com and YouTube. And I look forward to continuing our conversation and our bonding and our connection, especially in these times when we need each other more than ever. God bless you and be well. Thank you.